The night of the Tunguska event.
Close your eyes. Lie down comfortably and get ready, because tonight I will tell you the story of a mysterious event that took place more than 100 years ago, deep in the heart of Siberia. June 30th, 1908. Early in the morning, the sky shattered. 80 million trees vanished in an instant. The shockwave traveled around the world 3 times, but no one knew what had happened. This is the Tunguska event, one of the greatest mysteries in history. A meteor, a comet, or something else. This soothing sleep story will take you to Siberia in 1908. You will discover the final moments of eyewitnesses, the years-long investigations of scientists, and the incredible power of nature. A calm narration, a slow pace, and a deep sleep. This is what I have prepared for you tonight. If you enjoyed our channel, please don't forget to subscribe. Turn on notifications so you can be informed about every new story. Every 2 days, we are here with a new story. Don't forget to press the like button. This is very valuable to us. And in the comments, you can write which story you would like to hear. Now, lie down comfortably. Turn off the lights, close your eyes, and let the voice take you to Siberia, to the year 1908, to that mysterious morning, to that terrible explosion. Are you ready? Then let's begin. That morning in Siberia, no one knew that the sky was about to shatter. June 30th, 1908. Early in the morning, the Evenki herders living along the banks of the Podkamenya Tunguska River were preparing to graze their herds. The air was quiet. Birds were singing. The wind was gentle. It was a normal summer morning until the sky caught fire. 7:14 a.m. First, a bright light appeared on the horizon, brighter than the sun. A blinding whiteness, almost painful to the eyes. The herders looked up. They tried to understand what it was, but they couldn't, because they had never seen anything like it before. The light grew rapidly, a giant fireball covering the sky, blue, white, orange flames, as if the sun was falling to the earth. The herders froze, whether from fear or awe it is unknown, but they could not move. They only watched, and at that moment, the world changed. Explosion.
The sound was so powerful that it was heard from 1,000 kilometers away. Glass windows shattered, walls cracked, people were thrown to the ground. Some went deaf, some fainted. But the worst was at the center, because there the gates of hell had opened. The power of the explosion was equivalent to 15 megatons of TNT, 1,000 times the Hiroshima bomb. A forest covering 2,000 square kilometers vanished in an instant. 80 million trees were uprooted. Some burned, some were thrown into the air, some simply collapsed to the ground, as if a giant hand had crushed them. The shockwave traveled around the world 3 times. Seismographs shook in England, in America, in Japan. Scientists were stunned. What is happening? An earthquake? A volcano? But no one knew. because Tunguska was so remote that no one could go there. The Evenki herders fled in fear after the explosion. Some were injured, some were killed, but most were simply in shock. God has punished us. The end of the world has come. That is what they believed, because there was no other explanation. That night, something strange happened in Europe. The night was bright. The sky glowed with orange and red colors. In London, people could read newspapers at midnight. In Paris, the sky looked like a sunset, but the sun had already set. This was something else. Scientists could not find an explanation. Maybe the northern lights, maybe an atmospheric event, but no one was certain, because something like this had never happened before. But in fact, that brightness in the sky was dust from the Tunguska explosion. It had risen to the upper layers of the atmosphere. It was reflecting sunlight, and it was illuminating the world, even at night. Years passed, but the Tunguska event was not forgotten, because no one knew what had happened. There were only rumors, there were theories, but no definitive answer. 1921, a Russian scientist named Leonid Kulik decided to go to Tunguska. The state supported him. Go, find it, learn what happened. Kulik was excited. At last, he would learn the truth.
But the journey was very difficult. Siberia was so remote that it took days by train, then by horse-drawn cart, then on foot. Snow, swamps, forests, everything was extremely hard. But Kulik did not give up. Finally, in 1927, he reached Tunguska, and the sight he saw shocked him. An area of 2,000 square kilometers was completely devastated. Trees were lying on the ground in a radial pattern, as if a giant hand had pushed them outward from a central point. Some trees were burned, some were stripped, some were simply broken. But the strangest thing was this. At the central point, the trees were still standing. They had no branches, no leaves, just bare trunks, like poles. Kulik stared in amazement. How is this possible? He began to search for a crater, because if a meteor had fallen, there had to be a crater. But he couldn't find one. There was none. Just flat land, swamps, bushes, but no crater. Maybe the meteor exploded in the air. Maybe it never hit the ground. Kulik believed this theory, and he continued to look for evidence. For years, he went to Tunguska many times. He collected samples, took photographs, wrote reports, but he could not find a definitive answer because the evidence was not sufficient. In the 1930s, other scientists also began to go to Tunguska. Each one proposed a different theory: meteor, comet, volcano, gas explosion. Some even said it was an alien spaceship. Yes, an alien spaceship. In the 1940s, a Russian writer, Alexander Kazantsev, wrote a story. A spaceship exploded in Tunguska. There was a nuclear accident. The story became very popular. People believed it because there was no other explanation. But scientists laughed at it. An alien spaceship? Nonsense. This is not scientific. But still, the theory spread because people loved the mystery. In the 1950s, the Soviet government decided to investigate Tunguska in more detail. Teams were sent, samples were taken, they were analyzed, and finally, some clues were found. There were tiny metal particles in the trees: nickel, iron, cobalt, meteor components. This supported the meteor theory, but there was still no crater. How could that be? In the 1960s,
an American scientist proposed a theory. The meteor exploded in the air at an altitude of 5 to 10 kilometers. That's why no crater formed, but the shockwave destroyed the forest. This theory made sense, and most scientists accepted it. But some were still not convinced. If the meteor exploded in the air, why is there no radioactivity? Why are there no traces in the soil? The questions were still unanswered. In the 1970s, another theory emerged. Maybe this was a fragment of a comet, a mixture of ice and rock. It vaporized in the air. That's why no crater formed. This theory also made sense, but there was no definitive proof. In the 1980s, computer simulations were carried out. Models of the explosion were created, and the conclusion was this. Yes, a meteor or a comet exploded in the air at an altitude of 8 kilometers. Its power was 15 megatons. The shockwave destroyed the forest. This was the most logical explanation, and most scientists accepted it. But still, some mysteries remained. For example, why did the sky glow so brightly? Why were the nights in Europe illuminated? The answer was the atmosphere. The explosion hurled tons of dust into the upper layers of the atmosphere. This dust reflected sunlight, and it illuminated the world, even at night. This could be explained scientifically, but some people still did not believe it. No, this is a conspiracy. The truth is being hidden. Maybe it was a nuclear test. Maybe aliens. Conspiracy theories never ended. In the 21st century, thanks to modern technology, Tunguska was examined in greater detail. Satellite images, geological analyses, genetic studies, everything was done, and the result was always the same. A meteor or a comet exploded in the air. It destroyed the forest, but it did not hit the ground. This was the scientific reality. But still, there was no absolute certainty, because eyewitnesses had told different things. Some said, "I saw a fireball." Some said, "I heard a huge explosion." Others said, "I saw nothing. I only felt the ground shake." Because Tunguska was so remote that there were very few eyewitnesses, and their accounts differed from one another. But one thing was certain. That day, something terrible happened in Siberia. Nature showed its power, and humans realized how small they were. Now let us return to that day. Imagine it. June 30, 1908. An Evenki herder living in the Tunguska forest, Semyon Semyonov. That morning he was sitting outside his tent. He was having breakfast, drinking his tea. Everything was normal. But suddenly the sky flared. Semyon looked up. A bright light. It dazzled his eyes. "What is this?" he thought. But he could not answer, because the light was approaching rapidly. Then heat, hot, very hot, as if his face was burning. His shirt caught fire. Semyon panicked. He threw himself to the ground, rolled, tried to put out the flames. And at that moment, the explosion. The sound was so powerful that his ears burst. The shock wave hurled him into the air. He flew 3 meters, then fell to the ground. He lost consciousness. He did not know how long he was unconscious. Maybe a few minutes, maybe an hour. But when he woke, everything had changed.
The forest was gone. The tent was gone. The herd was gone. There was only smoke, only fire, only ash. Semyon stood up. He was trembling. He was crying, "Where is my family? Where is my herd?" But there was no one. There was only him, alone, injured, helpless. He began to walk, step by step, through the trees, but the trees were no longer standing. They had fallen to the ground, burned, broken. He saw a body, a reindeer, burned, blackened, then another body, another reindeer, then another, dozens of bodies. His herd was dead. Semyon collapsed onto his knees and cried, loudly, full of pain, because he had lost everything.
But then he heard a sound from afar. A human voice. "Help! Is anyone there?" Semyon stood up, ran toward the voice. There was another herder, Vasily. He was also injured. His face was burned. His arms were bleeding, but he was alive. The two men embraced each other. They cried because they had survived, miraculously. "What happened?" Vasily asked. "I don't know. God has punished us," Semyon replied. Days later, they found other survivors, a small group. All of them were injured. All of them were in shock, but they were alive. Together, they walked to the nearest village, Vanovara. It was 70 kilometers away, but there was no other choice. Along the way, they saw horror. Dead animals, burned trees, destroyed tents. Everything had been wiped out. When they reached Vanovara, the villagers were shocked. "What happened to you? Why are you like this?" Semyon told them, but no one believed him. "You're talking nonsense. Something like this is impossible." But days later, more refugees arrived. They all told the same story. The sky lit up. There was an explosion. The forest was gone. And then the villagers understood. Something terrible had happened. The news spread slowly, from Vanovara to Krasnoyarsk, from there to Moscow, then to the world. But in those days, communication was very slow, and Tunguska was very remote. That is why the world did not learn about it immediately. Toward the end of 1908, some newspapers reported the news, a mysterious explosion in Siberia. But no one paid much attention, because Russia was very large and Siberia was very far. But scientists were curious. What happened there? Why did such an explosion occur? But they could not go, because Tunguska was very dangerous, very isolated. In the 1910s, the First World War began. Tunguska was forgotten. Everyone was thinking about the war. In 1917, the Russian Revolution happened. The country fell into chaos. Tunguska was forgotten again. But Leonid Kulik did not forget. He was still curious. What happened there? And in 1921, he applied to the state. "Allow me to go. Let me investigate." The state gave permission. And thus, Kulik's journey began. A journey that lasted for years, difficult and dangerous. But Kulik did not give up, because he wanted to learn the truth. When he arrived in Tunguska in 1927, the sight he saw deeply affected him. "This is unbelievable. This is a historic event." He took photographs. He made notes. He collected samples. And when he returned, he published his report. The world was shocked. Really? Did such a thing happen? Kulik said yes, and this is very important for science. But unfortunately, Kulik could not fully learn the truth because the technology was not sufficient. There were only observations. There were only estimates. In 1942, Kulik died during the Second World War. But his legacy lived on because he was the pioneer of Tunguska research. After that, hundreds of scientists went to Tunguska. All of them tried to answer the same question: what happened there? And today, in 2025, it is still being studied because Tunguska has still not been fully explained. Yes, the meteor theory is the most logical one, but it is not 100% certain. Because some questions are still unanswered. For example, why are there strange magnetic anomalies in the lake? Why are there mutations in some plants? Why are there unusual chemical components in the soil? Maybe these are simply the result of the explosion. Maybe nothing else. But maybe there is something else. Maybe the truth is still hidden. And maybe we will never know, because Tunguska happened more than 100 years ago. Evidence disappeared over time. Eyewitnesses died. Only memories remained. But those memories are enough, because Tunguska reminds us of this: Earth is a dangerous place. Something can fall from the sky at any moment, and we must be prepared. Because Tunguska was a small event. Yes, a forest of 2,000 square kilometers was destroyed, but almost no one died because almost no one lived there. But what if Tunguska had fallen on Moscow, on New York, on Tokyo? Then millions of people would have died. Cities would have been destroyed. The world would have changed. That is why scientists are watching the sky, tracking asteroids and comets, working so that another Tunguska does not happen. Because Tunguska was a warning, a demonstration of the power of nature, and we must listen. Now let us go a little deeper. What happened after Leonid Kulik's first visit? After his first expedition in 1927, Kulik was determined to return to Tunguska because what he had found did not satisfy him. There was no crater, no meteor fragments, only destruction. In 1928, he made his second expedition. This time he came with a larger team. Geologists, botanists, photographers, all were there to uncover the secrets of Tunguska. In the swampy area, they found strange things. The water appeared deeper than normal, as if a crater had been filled with swamp water. Kulik was excited. Here it is. The meteor fell here. They tried to drain the swamp. They set up pumps. For days they pumped water, but the swamp was very deep and it kept filling up. They had to give up. In 1929, he made his third expedition. This time he brought drilling equipment. He tried to reach the bottom of the swamp. Maybe the meteor was buried very deep. They drilled 10 meters, 20 meters, 30 meters, but they found nothing. Only mud, stone, clay. There was no meteor. Kulik was disappointed, but he did not give up. Maybe somewhere else. Maybe the crater is somewhere else. He surveyed the area, examined every square meter, but he could not find a crater because there was no crater. In 1930, he made his fourth expedition.
This time, he took aerial photographs. He flew over Tunguska in an airplane, and the view he saw from above was striking. A radial pattern, a perfect pattern spreading outward from a central point. The trees looked as if they had been pushed outward by a giant finger. Kulik thought, "This is a shock wave from the air." The meteor did not hit the ground, it exploded in the air. This was a revolutionary theory, because until then, everyone had thought that the meteor had hit the ground. But Kulik had discovered something different. In 1938, he made his final expedition. This time, he collected more samples: tree samples, soil samples, water samples. He sent all of them to laboratories. The results were interesting. There were higher than normal magnetic particles in the trees. Perhaps the meteor had broken apart in the air, and small particles had been scattered across the forest. But in 1939, the Second World War began. Kulik was conscripted. Tunguska was forgotten once again. In 1942, Kulik was wounded in the war. He was taken to a prisoner of war camp, and there he died of dysentery, without fully solving the secrets of Tunguska. But his work inspired later generations. Hundreds of scientists followed in Kulik's footsteps, and Tunguska became one of the most popular topics in the scientific world. In the 1950s, the Soviets began more systematic research: chemical analyses, radioactivity tests, geological studies. Everything was done. Some scientists claimed that they had found radioactivity. This was a nuclear explosion. Maybe a spaceship's nuclear engine exploded. But other scientists could not confirm these findings, because in Tunguska, there was no radioactivity above normal levels. In some areas, there were slight increases, but these could have come from natural sources. In 1958, a Soviet scientist, Kirill Florensky, conducted a comprehensive study. He collected more than 1,500 samples, and the conclusion was this: Tunguska was a meteor or comet explosion. It exploded in the air at an altitude of 5 to 10 kilometers. The shock wave destroyed the forest. This was the most comprehensive and most scientific explanation, but still, some questions remained unanswered. In the 1960s, America also became interested. NASA studied Tunguska. Because if something like this could happen to Earth again, it was necessary to be prepared. They ran computer simulations. They tested different scenarios: meteor, comet, asteroid. The result of all of them was similar: an airburst, a massive shock wave, the destruction of the forest. In 1973, an American astronomer further developed the theory. Tunguska was a fragment of an icy comet. When it entered the atmosphere, it heated up due to friction. It exploded at an altitude of 8 kilometers. The ice instantly vaporized. That is why no crater formed. This theory made a lot of sense, because comets are mostly made of ice, and ice easily vaporizes in the air. In the 1980s, more evidence was collected. Microdiamonds were found in lake sediments. These diamonds form under high pressure and temperature. They were evidence of an explosion. In addition, tree rings showed an increase in growth rate after 1908. Because the explosion had cleared the forest, sunlight was reaching the ground more easily. Trees were growing faster. In the 1990s, satellite images were used. The exact center of Tunguska was identified, And there was a small lake, Lake Chaco. Could this be the remnant of a crater? In 2007, an Italian team studied Lake Chaco. They dived, took samples, but the result was disappointing. The lake was much older. It had nothing to do with the explosion. In 2013, after the Chelyabinsk meteor, Tunguska came back into focus. Because Chelyabinsk was like a small-scale Tunguska. It had exploded in the air. The shock wave had shattered thousands of windows. Scientists said, "Do you see? This is exactly how Tunguska happened," and no one doubted it anymore. In 2020, a study calculated Tunguska's trajectory. Based on eyewitness accounts, they determined where the meteor or comet had come from.
It was coming from the outer regions of the solar system, perhaps from the Kuiper belt, perhaps from the Oort cloud. It had been traveling through space for millions of years, and finally it had reached Earth. But in fact, it had not hit it. It had only entered the atmosphere, and it had exploded. If it had arrived a few seconds earlier or later, it might have fallen into the ocean. Maybe no one would have noticed. But the place it came down was Tunguska, isolated, desolate, forested. And because of that, no one died. Only trees died. Was this luck or fate? Who can know? But one thing is certain. Tunguska taught humanity a lesson. The sky is dangerous. Asteroids, comets, meteors, all of them are potential threats. And if we are not prepared, the next Tunguska could be much worse. Now, let us look from another perspective. What happened in Europe that day? How did people interpret the strange sky? London, June 30th, 1908, midnight. A man is looking out of his window. The sky is orange, like a sunset, but it is midnight. Strange, very strange, he thinks, but he is tired. He goes to sleep. The next day, the newspapers reported it. Mysterious sky phenomenon. Scientists seek an explanation. Some said it was the northern lights. Some said it was an atmospheric anomaly. Some said it was a gas explosion, but no one knew for sure. In Paris, an astronomer watched the sky all night. He took photographs, but he could not find an explanation. Maybe a solar storm, but it cannot be this powerful. In Berlin, a physicist developed theories. Perhaps a meteor exploded in the atmosphere. Dust spread. It reflects light. But there was no evidence, only speculation. And in Siberia, at that time, no one knew, because there was no communication, no telephone, no internet, only couriers. And for couriers to travel from Siberia to Europe took weeks. That is why the world could not learn immediately. The Tunguska event remained silent for months, for years, until Kulik went there in 1927.
And when Kulik arrived, the herders were still traumatized. God punished us. The end of the world was coming, but we survived, they said. Kulik listened to them. He took notes. Interesting, very interesting. This is very valuable for science. But the herders did not care about science. They were simply grateful to be alive. And maybe they were right, because life is more important than science. Now let us think from another angle. Why is Tunguska so important? Because Tunguska shows us that Earth is vulnerable. At any moment, something can fall from the sky, and we are not prepared. 65 million years ago, the dinosaurs disappeared this way. A massive asteroid struck Mexico. The world was plunged into darkness. The climate changed. The dinosaurs died. But mammals survived, and evolution continued. Eventually, humans appeared. But what if something like this happens again? What if a giant asteroid strikes Earth? Then humans could also disappear. That is why scientists are watching the sky. They are listing dangerous asteroids, and if they see a threat, they try to take action. In 2022, NASA carried out the DART mission. They crashed a spacecraft into a small asteroid, and the asteroid's orbit changed. This was a historic moment because it was the first time humanity had redirected an asteroid. And this happened thanks to Tunguska, because Tunguska gave us a warning. Be prepared, because the sky is dangerous.
Now let us take a deep breath and think for a moment. Was Tunguska really just an event that happened in the past, or was it a silent message left for us? Perhaps Tunguska was whispering this to humanity. The earth is fragile, humans are fragile, but science is strong. If we use science correctly, we can protect ourselves and our planet. Or perhaps it was saying something entirely different. Nature is powerful, humans are weak, and therefore we must be humble. Arrogance, carelessness, and indifference are the greatest dangers. In fact, both messages are true at the same time, because Tunguska reveals both the importance of science and our smallness in the face of nature. Humanity can survive only if it learns to establish balance, a balance between knowledge and fear, between power and humility, between progress and respect. Now close your eyes and imagine that morning, deep in the heart of Siberia, before the sun had fully risen. Think of that extraordinary light appearing above the forest. The sky turned into daylight for a moment, the horizon washed in fire. Then came the explosion, shaking not only the earth, but time itself. Trees fell like matchsticks, kilometers of land were flattened in a single breath, and then everything stopped. Birds fell silent, the wind ceased, the world held its breath. Only the crackling of the burning forest remained. The silence was heavy and deep, a silence that seeped into the soul. Within that silence there were survivors, people looking around in fear and confusion without fully understanding what had happened. And then, slowly, they realized one thing: they were alive. At that moment, nothing else mattered. Not questions, not answers, not explanations, only being alive. Because sometimes surviving is enough. Nothing else has meaning. Tunguska reminds us of this. Life is precious. Life is fragile. And life must be protected. Not only for today, but also for those who have not yet been born. Because Tunguska is in the past, but the sky is still with us. And one day, there may be another Tunguska. That is why we must be prepared, with knowledge, with science, and with humility. Now, drift slowly into sleep. Let yourself sink into a deep and peaceful rest, because the story of Tunguska ends here, but its message lives on. Good night, sweet dreams, and remember, the sky is both beautiful and dangerous, but we are strong because we have science, we have knowledge, and knowledge is the greatest power. Tunguska will be remembered forever
as a mystery, as a lesson, and as a warning, and we will not forget it, ever.